How's it going, everybody? This is Justin Boseman, and you've stumbled across another episode of Revolution Radio. I know it's been quite a while since I've done one of these, and I will be joined momentarily by a friend of the show and a guest of the show. Before I do, I want to start off by letting you know what this podcast is going to be about because I'm going to talk about at length about black liberals, and I'm going to talk about how I believe that black liberals have totally ruined the black community, how they've hurt us more than they've helped, and what needs to be done in order to change the tide. So I want to bring to your attention before I introduce my guest and bring him on to an article that was written a couple years ago by the Heritage Foundation. And what it talks about is something that I am going to talk about later on in the show, which is how has the war on poverty done since it's been implemented in the 1960s. And there's an article on the Heritage Foundation website on heritage.org, and it's about the war on poverty after 50 years. It's by Rachel Sheffield and Robert Rector, and it mentions that we have spent over $22 trillion on anti-poverty programs, which is basically adjusted for inflation. And this doesn't even include Social Security or Medicare. And we spent more on this than we've spent in any war. And so what has it really done for us? And basically what it has done for us is I believe that it has made the country, and especially the black community, even more dependent on the government. Because what it does is these were their takeaways. There are three takeaways from it. It said the lack of progress in building self-sufficiency since the beginning of the war on poverty 50 years ago is due in major part to the welfare system itself. Why do they think that? They think that because when you incentivize the woman being able to have kids and not be with the man and not be with her husband and making her married to the state and allowing men to abandon their social and their economic and moral responsibilities to their families, you basically create a new cycle, a new vicious cycle that will be continued on in the generations after that. And so number two, what they also said, by breaking down habits and norms that lead to self-reliance, welfare generates a pattern of increasing intergenerational dependence. That's why you see so many different generations of the mom's on welfare, and then the kids are on welfare. The daughter gets pregnant, and now she's on welfare. And it's a consistent cycle because that's what it creates. And number three, the anti-marriage penalties should be removed from welfare programs, and long-term steps should be taken to rebuild the family in lower income communities. Now, what I take that to mean is this: before the war on poverty, less than 13% of children were born in out of wedlock homes. After that, the number has risen in America to over 40%. Over 40%. Over 40% of kids are now born into a single parent household. And this is all after the implementation of the Great Welfare State. And this is because of Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. I believe that the war on poverty was something that was systematically put into place to help stop the progress that black people had made throughout the Reconstruction, going all the way through the 1900s, through the 1920s, and even going beyond that past the 1940s and 50s. I believe that that is where you saw the black community start to lose the progress that it had gained ever since the freeing of the slaves. And what do I mean by that? I mean the fact that we had gone from a people who were oppressed and slaves and picking cotton to people who were able to start their own colleges and universities, coming from a people who weren't allowed to read and write and be educated, to now there were historical black colleges, to now there were black businesses, to now there were black doctors and lawyers, to now there were blacks who owned their own land and owned their own farms and owned all their own stuff. And we had our own infrastructure. But ever since then, the black community has gone backwards ever since this war on poverty has begun. So my question to my listeners out there listening, what has the war on poverty actually changed, and has it done anything for the good of the black community? I've given you my reasons for why I don't think it has been good for the black community, and I'm going to talk more when I bring on my guest, who is now with me, Daryl Meadows, who's on here, a friend of Revolution Radio, about why I'm against black liberals, why I hate all the anti-American rhetoric that has been going on. And as I bring him onto the show, I want to ask him a question. With the current racial undertones in this country, Daryl, and with the current actions of what, you know, people are seeing on TV, and the protests at Berkeley and the protests in the NFL, where do you think all this stuff is coming from now?
Well, thank you for having me on again, Justin. Let's really get into that. These protests seem to just pop up recently. It's like this is the year of protesting. Ever since the election, everyone is all up in arms about anything that they can seem to find offense to lately. And I think right now, the anti-free speech movement is just like gung-ho, because the liberals are extremely mad that they lost the election, and they have to they have to live with it. And unfortunately,
They haven't.
I think they haven't been able to accept it. But if you really think about it, like this is like a new generation. Like we said before, I believe they've never really lost anything. They've been a generation of participation rewards, being told that they can be anything, and pretty much people going to college and getting degrees in fields that have literally no employment opportunities, and then complaining that, you know, the system's against them.
Now my next question is this, because this is what I see. I'll start with I call it the anti-American movement, and it starts with this whole protest in the NFL that you see now, even last year, of the flag. Now, granted, let's keep this in mind. You know, people want to say that this is all Trump's fault, but Trump wasn't the president last year when Colin Kaepernick started this. And I predicted on this very show, on this program last year in December, that Colin Kaepernick would not get re-signed by any NFL team as a result. And I was right. I'd like to pat myself on the back. If you want to go back and listen to audio to last year's shows, I said it. And now what I see now is he was doing it last year when Obama was president. And then I hear the reasoning now. This is what I'm hearing. The reason of why his protest was, and this is what he said, because he believes that there is inequality and still racism in this country, and he refuses to stand for a flag in a country that still promotes inequality and injustice. Now, my question for him, and I always ask people this, is where is the inequality and the discrimination and the injustice at? Where do you see it at? Because if they want to bring up the police brutality, I can bring up some numbers that can prove otherwise, because they're basing this whole thing on what I believe to be a false narrative and what I call a black liberal talking point, which hasn't been relevant since the 1940s or 50s. Do I believe that black men get killed by cops? Yes. Do I believe that it is the biggest issue in the black community, or it is the issue that we need to be taking first and foremost seriously? No, I don't. And I have stats that can back that up. In fact, I'm going to ask you a question, Daryl. How many men by cops, how many black men do you think are killed by the cops every year?
How many men or black men?
How many black men? How many black men do you think are killed by the cops, whether it be in a legal means,
armed or unarmed?
armed and unarmed?
I've done these numbers as well, so I'm gonna if I give a high number, we'll say 650 combined per year.
You all right now you said killed, right? Killed
Yes,
by cops, armed and unarmed.
Armed and unarmed, about 650, because the total is still basically less than 2,000 a year by police, something around there.
Now I'm gonna invite you to a study that was done by the Washington Post. All right.
Yes.
I'm gonna give you the number of what they said, and this was according to the Washington Post. So just so that people can't accuse me of being a conservative and only using conservative research think tanks. The Washington Post is a notoriously liberal paper, right? Can we both agree on that? Okay. The Washington Post, they tally every year. Last year, they said 16 unarmed black men were killed by the police. 16.
That's a good number. That's better than I thought it would be, actually.
Now, granted, the year before, the number was 36.
So they're actually improving.
They're actually improving. Now, I have a question. Do you think more people get struck by lightning yearly or get killed by the police yearly?
Lightning, for sure.
Especially black men. In terms of black men being killed by the cops and people getting struck by lightning.
Lightning should still be higher.
You would be 100% correct. That's 300 men, right? So my question then to you is, how can people take those numbers and come up with this idea that the police killing black people is one of the biggest issues in this country that we should be concerned about? Why is that more important than the number of other stats that I just gave, such as the war on poverty and 75% of African American children being born into single parent households, and us not being married, and us not being educated, and us being put in jail? How is that taking the forefront and taking attention away from what the real issues are? Why do we talk about that and not about the gangs in Chicago, or just the random guys in Chicago who shoot each other over the block? Like, how is that more important? Why don't they protest that?
There's two sides to this argument. I would like to say that as an organization, Black Lives Matter focuses on police brutality. That's their niche that they want to
on a false narrative, which by the way,
false narrative, but
which by the way, I will say I am totally against the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will read to you why in a little bit as you go on. But please tell me the other side, please.
So let's just say that, if that's their niche is, police brutality and inequality and justice, for the most part. But, they've never once said that, they're like against local gangs and everything. It's not because they're not. I think that's just, it's not their position. They're not holding that position. It would kind of be like if you went to, this is the argument they would basically make. It would be like if you went to, say you had testicular cancer or something, and someone came in and said, well, you're doing all this fundraising for testicular cancer. Why don't you do fundraising for breast cancer? And you're like, well, I'm not worried about that because that's not what I have. And so to them, that's how they're phrasing this argument, is that they're focused on police brutality, and there are other organizations who can focus on crime in the inner city.
Now, do you remember when the NAACP president was asked what is a more important question and more important problem? Uh, Cops killing black men, or I should even say, he was asked if police brutality was more important than, let's say, the epidemic of fatherless homes in the African American community. And guess what he said? He said the epidemic of fatherless homes are more problematic for the black community. So, therefore, my question is this. When you bring up the fact that you think, and this is what they claim. They claim that cops exist to kill black people, even though it has been researched and studied that they kill more white people every year and a higher percentage of them than they do black people. Research has been done to show that white cops, when they get around black men, they are actually less likely to shoot a black man due to the fallout and everything else that will happen if they do than they are to shoot a white man. And so my thing is when they bring attention to this, and you mentioned this, they said that it's not their job to, look at the other issues. But I would think that if you're more likely to get killed from a homicide as a black man in this country, whereas a white man is more likely to get killed by a car accident, I would think that Black Lives Matter, since Black lives quote unquote matter to them, which by the way, yeah, which is why I'm totally against this organization for other reasons, which I will explain later. You would think that they would address the number one reason of why black men die in this country, but they haven't done that. Instead, what they've done is they've lashed out and said, well, it's because of cops, and it's because of white cops killing black men, when research studies have shown actually that more black cops kill black men than white cops do. Oh, but that's not mentioned though. That's not mentioned in their research. And to mention more in the research, President Obama, after the whole Ferguson incident and all that, he sent out his black attorney general, who's black, to do a study on the police and police brutality. And they found out that police violence against blacks ever since the year of 1940 and 1950 has decreased 75% as of 2015. So my question is, where is all this coming from? And then I can get more into what the topic of the show is, which is the black liberal, and why the black liberal is a traitor to the black community as a whole. Why do you think that all that's coming up now?
That's media right there playing into a narrative. My guess, if you want to look at the media, it's all about being divisive. If the country was not divided on every issue that they could come up with, then the politicians that are sitting in there that are doing nothing, and the problems that are going on in many communities would actually start being solved. And when you have that, then you have a power structure that starts to collapse because it's finding itself more and more useless to the people, because they realize that they have the power to make the changes in their lives. So instead of having a united society, because this has literally been going on since Obama got in office, like it was at an all-time high because of the war being so long after Bush that people were starting to be unified and say bring home the troops and all that, and then Obama got in there, and it's been collapsing ever since, and it's just been getting worse and worse. But yeah, it's literally about keeping everyone divided, because it allows certain people to stay in power and stay in control. And if you look at many of the, like you said, the liberal cities the Democrats have been in, they've been in there for a long time. It's almost like you go from one Democrat to the next Democrat and nothing changes, and they keep on voting in Democrats because for whatever reason, like you would think they'd be jaded at Democrats for never getting anything done, but they're more jaded at Republicans for something that happened 70 years ago that they believe happened. And it's an endless cycle that the liberal Democrats that are in power use. They keep the identity politics playing so that they never change their views.
Which is also another media liberal talking point that is not based on facts. It's based on what they say. So, all right, let me start right there with this whole thing of this whole taking a knee thing, which nobody even knows why NFL players are even taking knees now. Nobody even knows. Like people, all people knows is that they're doing it. My thing,
it's actually that's a real funny story because even the people like before people knew what they were taking knee for, and now like so many people were protesting this last weekend that like there's no straight story anymore. It's kind of just like all falling apart.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't get, because when they went into this protest, the first thing that he said, which is based on a false narrative, because you have the guy on the Seahawks talking about, oh, there's still inequality in this country, there's still this in this country. And then my question to them always is this: for all the black liberals who are walking around with a chip on their shoulder talking about, well, white people did this and white people are racist and white people did that, my thing is to them, it's 2017. Where are these examples of quote unquote systematic racism in 2017? Where is the school that you couldn't get into because you were black? Where is the housing or the apartment building that you tried to live in that you couldn't live in because you were black? What is the job that you couldn't get, more specifically, because you were black? Where is the restaurant that you couldn't go into and eat because you were black? Where is it? I want to know, where is it at? If you can show me where these places are at, I'll fight them with you together. But when you come out and you just say, oh, there's still inequality and racism in this country, I can give them more examples of inequality that proves to the black community that they're actually traitors to them than they can to me, that show me that white people are oppressing black people via the myth of now systemic racism. Can you tell me where they're getting this from?
So a lot of the racism now is it's more covert. It's not out in the open in your face. And
where's it at?
That's what I'm trying to get to. So it's not something that you can see with your own eyes. It's actually something that you would have to research in order to find happening. So for example, you would have to look at the criminal justice system, where you find out that black criminals are actually more likely to be sentenced for longer terms than white criminals, which is definitely a problem. But at the same time, you have the instances where you have judges and to put black people away for longer periods of time.
I'm glad you brought that up, man, because you know what? To piggyback on your point, I'm gonna share this with you. Research has shown that black men do serve more time in prison sentences for certain things, but that is not because of them being black. It is due to other secondary characteristics, such as them being more likely to be second offenders and on their second strike when going into a sentencing hearing. That has been researched even by the Obama administration. So, and also they are researched at higher, and they are convicted at higher numbers in terms of their percentage, because they are more likely to commit crimes. But when the same incident is brought up for a white person, they get sentenced to the same number of years, especially if they did the same crime with the same times of repeat offenses. That has been disproven by the Obama administration.
So what about first offenses where they're sentenced longer?
That is a myth. That has not been shown to be true.
So
it is It is a fact.
What do you
It is a
what do you
fact.
call Brock Turner?
Okay, let me give you a good example of how the justice system works. This is my thing. If you choose not to plead guilty for a crime and then you are convicted, you go away for a longer period of time, way longer, way longer. More white people, more white dudes, since they usually are, and I hate saying this, usually in most cases, they are more likely to listen to their lawyers. They plead guilty and they get less time. Anytime that anybody pleads guilty and you take a plea bargain, that's why it's called a plea bargain, you get less time when you take a plea bargain because you bargain to get less time because you're saying instead of going through this process and being proven guilty, I will admit my guilt and ask for the court to be lenient in my sentence. Black men don't do that. Black men don't plead guilty. Black men plead guilty in less numbers than white men do. And that is why they are sentenced to longer sentences of crimes. What is the next myth from this organization? Please continue.
Where were we at actually? With the okay, okay. So let's see. We went with the crimes. All right. So then we have affirmative action in place that gets people jobs. So I'm not really for
that. which that's another sign that quote unquote that this white supremacist society quote unquote is going all out to, I guess, keep holding black people down because they put affirmative action in. You know, does that make sense to you? Like, I don't understand how people are saying all this when affirmative action not only dictates that black people have to get certain jobs, but they also have to be accepted into colleges, a certain number, even if, and here's the number, even if they are less qualified than another applicant.
And that's an issue in and of itself, because what you end up having is you don't even have enough people actually even making it to college to apply to even fill the quotas that they need to make.
And to me, but here's the thing, and I think this is why now the country is being divided even more. And when you have guys like, you know, the San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich talking about white privilege and whatnot, and saying white people need to be aware of their past and be aware that they got a head start. That's partially true, but my thing is when you consistently tell white America in 2017 that they have made no strides to overcome a past that had slavery in it and Jim Crow, and when you say that every white person who is white in this country has experienced white privilege, to me what you're doing is you're offending people who maybe would have been able to sympathize with your cause. My thing is with the people who are upset about people killing cops, they haven't even gone through the right process to even educate black people on why cops are allowed to shoot people even when it doesn't seem to be justified and get away with it. I haven't heard one NFL player encourage people to go out and change their legislative laws, to go make their congressmen and their politicians accountable to change the laws so that it makes it so that cops can be policed by the civilians when certain things come up like that. But I haven't heard them talk about that one time. I haven't heard them say, you know what, if you want them to not be able to kill people and get away with it, you know, what you need to do is you need to go to your legislators and demand that they change the laws. I haven't heard them say that one time. There hasn't been one black person that said that. I haven't heard nobody say it. Nobody.
So it's funny because I was talking about this a little bit earlier and the other day. A friend of mine posted that, you know, police are supposed to protect and serve. And I told her, I said, no, I was like, the police are there to enforce laws. I was like, they're not there to protect and serve. The Supreme Court's ruled on it multiple times that they have no duty to protect and serve. So that the belief in the community, though, is that they're there to protect and serve. And they don't realize that, no, the reason we call them Leos is because they're law enforcement officers. They're there to enforce the law. So you need to redefine what their position is. And like you said, go to your politicians, go to your whoever can make those changes. And I've also pointed out that all these people that complain about police brutality, I said, I don't see anyone. There's very few. You find them here and there, maybe once every 5 or 6 weeks, someone will say it, but you don't see any of these Black people standing up and becoming police officers. You don't see any of them going to school and becoming lawyers or judges, and you don't see any of them just moving into these positions where they can make these decisions and change these things. So to me, it's like, if you're not going to be a police officer and be the one that uses your own judgment to not shoot a unarmed Black man or another Black man whenever you're a police officer, like you really don't have a position if you're not going to take on a role that could actually help stop what's happening. I was like, because that's the only thing I have against the protests is, like, if you could take a knee all day long, I was like, and you can scream in the streets and you can block streets all day long, but until you actually start making steps and taking steps to actually change the things that are causing the problems, I was like, you'll never get anywhere. Like, you can't, like, I say this because it seems like this is what they want. You can't expect white people to care as much as you care for Black people and to do everything for you. You can't beg and plead to a system that was not built for you. So if you're going to sit here and tell me that white people are racist and the whole system is out to get you, then why are you begging and pleading to the system of these people that you claim don't care? Instead, you should be sitting here, like, working together to take over those positions in your community so that white people don't have to come in from other neighborhoods and police your own neighborhoods for you.
Which brings me to my next point. And you talked about, and I think this is where this ultimately comes from, the anti-American rhetoric, which is what most people interpret these flag protests as being, because what they say is this is what they say. This is their reasoning. They say, because the national anthem and the flag was all represented and made by guys who had slaves and sold slaves and did all these things, it should be abolished, and we should not have to go with what this country was built upon. And my response to that is, okay, can you show me a society or a country in the world that did not commit any atrocity to establish itself as a nation? Can you show me that nation? The answer is no. But
exactly, because that's how the world worked back then. You conquered people and you took over land.
And then I ask my next question, which is then, okay, with that being said, would you not agree, though, that this country, though, has made the most strides to repair itself and what the original intent was behind a lot of things that this nation was built on? For instance, there used to be slavery, yes, but there was a war within itself, and then slavery was abolished. So then the Constitution was what? It was amended. There used to be Jim Crow in the South, and then we fought against Jim Crow, and guess what? They had to get rid of Jim Crow. There used to be only one way for Black people to be able to support themselves with jobs. So what did they give them? We got affirmative action. So my thing is that this country has consistently, even from the beginning of, at the end of the Civil War, in terms of freeing the slaves, they've done things to try to prove that they want to make everyone equal, that everyone is going to be equal, that everyone is going to be born on equal standing. But I think what Black people see when they see white people is they think they see the rich white people, and they believe that every rich white person owned slaves, or their family owned slaves back in the day, and as a result, they're behind because, well, you guys were allowed to own slaves and we weren't. When in fact, that's not how the country was. And in fact, even now to this day, in terms of white people and this myth of white privilege as it goes on. Not every white person is born into a situation in which they inherit riches and glory and everything else. There are a lot of white people who are born into the same Section 8 housing, single parent households, bad situations, economic tragedies. There's a lot of them. But the thing is, I think that what is going on is I think that the media, like you said, has devised this plan to try to make it a race warfare and class warfare. And I think it's built on a lie. I think that black people have progressed at an unbelievable pace. And I think that the only thing that has stopped or slowed down black people from progressing, and I mentioned it at the start of the show, is the war on poverty from Lyndon Johnson. Ever since the war on poverty has started, black people have gone backwards economically.
Well,
period.
Well, you have to look at like society right now as well. You have a lot of people going to college, and college is, like you said, is extremely leftist. There's so much Marxism being taught in college right now. So I've noticed that a lot of the black community is almost completely to the point where they're so disenfranchised and so uneducated that they're literally to the point where they oppose capitalism in its form, because they believe capitalism is what caused slavery. Because if it wasn't for capitalism, slave owners wouldn't have needed slaves, because everyone would have worked together for equality under communism. And so they believe capitalism is evil, and therefore the progress that could be made, that is made in this country, that has been made through capitalism, even though it's been cronyism for a long period of time, it's still a form of capitalism. And the progress that's made through capitalism is just not realized to them. They're ignorant to economics and in general. And so, like you said, the schools that used to be built, the cities that used to be built, you could go back like to Greenwood, Tulsa, the richest black neighborhood in the country, aka Black Wall Street, and they had everything there. They were building, they had land, they had landowners, they had oil barons, they had all of that.
Yep.
And granted, it was destroyed by ignorance, but at the same time, it seemed like the black community has just accepted to being a victim. And every time I bring it up with people that are like, let's change the black community, I say, oh yeah, we could build another Black Wall Street. And every single time it gets turned into, no, because as soon as we start to succeed, they'll destroy it again. And I'm just like, I'm like,
That's exactly what they say. That's exactly what they say.
I'm like, you do realize we're in 2017. Like, the army is full of black people. They're not just gonna decide that, like back in 1930, to just bomb your city because it's full of black people. I was like, if that was the case, I was like, we'd have gotten rid of Chicago already.
And even then, they've still, and I believe that I think the government, and I have to look this up, but I think that they've agreed to pay some sort of reparation for the people of Tulsa who lived in that area, and the ancestors who lost property and all that. And I think that they have agreed to do that. So
yeah, they did. I'm not exactly sure exactly what they did, but they said they made through best efforts to pay reparations to the descendants of those who were in the town and the community. But the damage was done in the community, and even if you like read the history on it, apparently like the community completely shut down to the point where like they wouldn't even talk about what happened. So almost an entire generation that grew up in that community like doesn't even know what happened in the community, like literally years before they were born. It's just become this thing that it's like almost like alternative history, because no one wants to talk about it. And I think that is a problem in itself, because like no history, you're bound to repeat it. And those types of things can happen if people allow certain things to continually grow. But I think people are doing a fine job of policing those situations themselves right now.
And it goes back to my question of when, because I always hear, and this is what I hear. This is what I hear a whole bunch of. I always hear, well, white people did this and they did that and they experienced this, and America was built on the back of slaves and this and that. And then when I bring up certain stats that they don't like to hear, such as the South was built on slaves, and only about 5% of whites down south owned slaves. They don't like to hear that either.
Yeah, they don't like to hear that.
Also, when I bring up the fact that in the South, which nobody talks about this, there were also blacks who owned slaves too. That's not brought up.
I was thinking that, but I didn't know if you were going to bring up the point.
That's not brought up. And then people always want to talk about reparations, and they want to talk, and they had this anti-American rhetoric. And my question always is, where else do you see black people in the world who have the ability to make millions of dollars to play a game, to make movies, to be entertainers, to do all these different types of things? Where else in the world do you see black people with that type of opportunity and that ability to be able to do that? You don't see it anywhere, but yet these are the same people who claim that this country's held them down. And my thing is, it's like, yo, you guys in the NFL and in the NBA, you're in the top 1%.
Yeah, they are.
Like, there is no such thing as inequality for y'all. Like there is no such thing as
that's one argument that always drives me crazy, because I mean, so you look at the, like you said, the breakdown of like the top 1% or the top 0.1%, whatever you want to look at the billionaires. And so, yeah, you might have, I believe, like 2 or 3 black billionaires, I think, total. I can't really remember the number offhand. I know Jordan was one of them. He might be down a little bit because, brands bounce and go. But for the most part, I mean, yeah, we got most of your billionaires are white, Jewish, a bunch of Chinese are showing up recently, but they have, I don't know if you can trust Chinese billionaires because of, currency manipulation and all that.
Yeah, they manipulate their currency.
which they haven't lately, so that's good. Calling them out on it, they've stopped being so blatantly obvious with it.
Which I think that I predicted that if somebody would do that, they would have to stop, and they did.
But whenever they say that, and I say, okay, you want to call the country racist, I was like, but for a minute, the CEO of Walmart was a black woman, and you have, like you said, Jordan, you have black billionaires, Damon John, creator of FUBU. Mm-hmm. You have all the successful athletes. Granted, we have a lot more black successful athletes than than business owners, which
but also there are more doctors in the United States than anywhere else in the world.
Exactly. But whenever I hear this, I tell people, I'm like, look, every time you say that you can't achieve anything because you're being held down, you diminish all the achievements of these great black individuals who have succeeded under all these systems. And if these people can do it, like, there's nothing stopping you from being able to do it except yourself. And I think it's just a lack of positivity in the community. Like, I don't want to always say that they want to be victims. I think sometimes it's just a lack of confidence and a lack of understanding of how systems work and how communities work. Because I was talking to a group, I said, money is one of the biggest problems in the black community. I was like, and that problem comes from them not spending money in the black community. And I say, if you spent money in the black community, I was like, do you know how much more wealth would come into the community? I said, if you were to import products and create businesses from products in Africa, I was like, you could boost Africa up while also increasing productivity and job opportunities in the black community. You wouldn't be complaining about systemic oppression or systemic racism. I was like, and talking about how, you can't get good jobs. I was like, because you'd be able to provide yourself with your own jobs. And that's what kills me is, like, these cries about systemic racism and systemic oppression, and how affirmative action. I was like, literally, I was like, all it is I was like, you're sitting on the bottom of the throne, and white supremacy is sitting on top, and you continually ask them, can you give me more? Can you give me more? Instead of just going for yourself. I was like, I hate affirmative action. They're like, but white people would get all the jobs. I was like, let them get all the jobs. I was like, maybe you'd get up off your ass and create a job then.
Let me give you a stat. Economically, black people were more prosperous in the time before the Great Welfare State and before the War on Poverty and before affirmative action than they are right now. Can you believe that?
I can believe that, because you could see it in the towns.
You can see it in the towns. And so my thing is if liberal policies are supposed to work to advance the black community, and they've been shown, and we've seen over the last 50 years how much we've progressed as black people, if they've been shown not to work, why is it then that when somebody who's black brings that up, you have to be an Uncle Tom, you have to be a coon, you got to be a bootlicker, you got to be all these different things? And I boldly suggest that those black liberals who like to call people like me the Uncle Tom and the coon, I believe that they in fact are the traitors to their own race. Even Malcolm X said that when you consistently vote for a party or for a group of people who consistently do not put your needs and your interests first, and they put the needs of others first, you are a traitor to your own race. You've been hoodwinked. You've been bamboozled. You've been left out of the discussion. There is no seat on the table for you. And so for me, when I look around and I see how the liberals now, especially the black liberals, they're so willing to fight for illegal immigrants who, if I ask you a riddle, nobody will ever get this answer. If I ask you, who are the only class of people in this country who are allowed to violate federal law and get away with it and get rewarded for it, nobody would have an answer. But I can give you an answer. It's illegal immigrants, because they're the only class of people who can violate federal law by coming here illegally. And then you have people fighting on their behalf to not only not be prosecuted because of what they did, but to allow them to stay and keep it and reward them for it. Meanwhile, if a black man, if Jamal and Tyrone sit on the corner and sit on the block because they're dreamers too, and they dream of their kids being able to play with Power Wheels and being able to give their kids a better house to live in, and they want to be able to take their kids to Disney World, and they want to make money, so they're hustling coke and violating federal law. Guess where they go? They go to jail. Do they get to keep the money that they made? No. Do they get to keep the crack that they were selling? No. Do they get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law? Yes. But yet, the party that black people have sworn their allegiance to fights for them, but they don't fight for y'all. They fight for the LGBT to get married and do all these different types of things, but yet they can't fight for black people to get better schools in their community. They spend their money in their communities on terrible infrastructure, which is why black communities have the worst schools even to this day.
There's okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but the whole illegal immigrants thing, it's kind of funny because people don't realize, it's like, why do you think Hispanics voted for Trump at rates of 30, almost 40, 35%? I was like, it's not because Trump was racist. I was like, it's not because Trump hated Mexicans and wanted to build a wall and they were just stupid and voting against their best interests. It's because they came here the right way, and they know there are millions of others who came here the wrong way while they sat there in their country waiting for the right chance to come across the border the legal way. I said, that's why they voted for Trump. I was like, because Trump would make them make them go back and make them sit in line like they had to do in order to achieve the American dream. We, like everyone says, we have a legal way to come into the country.
That's right.
And we have an illegal way to come into the country.
That's right.
Now, I don't fully agree with the whole illegal way to come into the country. I think people should be able to come into the country, but I think we should still have control over our borders. We should just have a more streamlined process for how to get in.
Wait a minute. That's a contradictory. That's a contradiction. That's a contradictory statement. You either have to believe that people have to come here legally, or you don't.
No. What I'm saying is, I believe, as a libertarian, that people should be able to come freely. The only issue is I believe that we should still have control over our borders and not just let anyone in, because there's no way to know whether they are violent towards people. So
okay, all right.
I'm a closed borders libertarian. I believe that.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I believe the border should be closed, but I believe we should have a more streamlined plan for how people move into this country and gain citizenship. It shouldn't be such a long. The government shouldn't have such a arduous process to do it. It should be something a little bit more simpler, especially if it's an allied country, sort of like Mexico. Even though we know there's a lot of violence and corruption and everything down there, I think we could figure out a system that would be faster, so that these people can come here and be productive sooner. You believe
in legal immigration is what you're saying.
I believe in legal immigration.
Well, I think most people do. I think what most people disagree on.
I think Democrats believe in illegal immigration because Democrats black people don't vote. Black people don't vote enough for them. And if you looked at the census, the black community has pretty much been stagnant in growth.
That is correct.
I'm talking about just like population-wise stagnant in growth
due to
the last 20 years.
Yep, due to liberal policies that were put in place to prohibit and to restrict the growth of the black community. Like I said, from the 1960s on.
Abortion.
I mean that's a liberal policy.
Yeah,
abortion is definitely. I mean, abortion first and foremost was prioritized toward black people. It's prioritized to make sure that we don't continue to procreate, because if we do, we grow as a group in this country. People don't want that, and so why not legalize it? Because it would affect us the most, especially if you can get black women to never marry black men and never have kids, and get them to consistently engage in stuff outside of marriage and participate.
Get them stuck on the system.
Get them stuck on the system. You can get them to get abortions and stuff. You can keep their population down. It's a form of population control, and nobody ever calls them out on this. And if you're a black person and you call them out on it, then you're a coon. Then you're an Uncle Tom. Then you're a guy who's against who's against your own race. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, I don't know why any black person who has sense would say, you know what, killing black babies is a good thing. You know what, having black men out of the house, that's a good thing. You know what I'm saying?
Having them in jail, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are people that believe having black men in jail is a good thing because there's so much crime going on and violence in the community. So, you get that. But the whole it's funny because you were talking about how when you're not part of the hive mind of the black community, you get called every name by the black community that they can come up with. And I said, you know why we don't have overt racism as badly as we did in like the 50s and 60s?
Because white people won't call you half the stuff that black people will call you. I said it's not that white people have become less racist. I said it's that they have black people to do it for them now. And not even just that. My thing is when people talk about racism, I don't believe that white people have the power anymore to be systematically racist in the way that they once did. I don't believe it. I just don't believe that it's there. I don't believe that it's there. And the reason why I don't believe that it's there, and I know people can disagree with me when they watch this, is because when you have white people who predominantly vote for a black president, the highest office in the land, and when you have all these different things in place now where, you know, in order for somebody to be racist, they have to be in a position of power. People who are racist, who isn't a racist that is automatically torn down or renounced. I've never heard of a overtly racist person being voted into office. Now all the black people who are in the hive mind will say Trump is, but my argument to them is this: when did you hear about Donald Trump being a racist before he wanted to run for president?
There's very few people that would have heard anything. It became more mainstream after he decided to run for president. But you could say that.
Isn't that funny?
But it is because it's the whole, like I said, media controlling people. It's all fixed outrage. People don't think for themselves. They don't do this research on their own. They have to have someone tell them, and they have to have someone to tell them to be upset about it. And that pisses me off the most, is that an event cannot happen. So let's say we're talking about the whole kneeling, and even on the conservative side, they are just as bad to just says and going with it. And I'm more of a, I'm going to come up with my own view of how I see something before I take in the views of other people, because to me, I have to look at it through my eyes and see how I see it. And then I say, oh, so why do they see it this way? And why do they see it this way? And does either side make sense to me? And then I change my views. If it doesn't make sense, then I don't change my views, and I'll stick with my view. But now we have people that literally, like, it's almost like clockwork. I can look at something on the news and I'm like, oh, I know who's going to be mad about that already. And yeah, so it's kind of just, I don't even know where I was going with this, but it's one of those things where, like, no one thinks for themselves anymore, and that's the whole media thing to me. And it's just like, I don't know how we can really fix that other than trying to get people to think for themselves, but they like being either.
I think you have to bring attention to the fact of all these things that they're talking about are really not things that affect people in their everyday life, such as they all want to quote unquote bring up, oh, there's inequality and racial injustice and blah, 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 blah. And my thing is,
how many people is that actually affecting?
Yeah. How is that affecting you in your day-to-day life? You getting up, going to work, interacting with your kids. For the most part, for a lot of people, it's not. But if you live in these inner city war zones, the biggest issue that you should have is the safety of your kids.
I made
the education of your kids.
Let me go find it.
And the lack of fathers in your community. You should be concerned with that. That has nothing to do with any government person. And if it does have to do with the government, it has to do with a government that will allow you and enable you to keep having kids while being in a progressively dependent welfare state and consistently reward you for doing so. So who does that? Well, what do you know? It's the black liberal who believes in the war on poverty and a welfare state.
So I had a friend complaining about, like the inequality and justice and everything, and how, like the whole police brutality. And I was like, and I shared some images from a tweet from my boy Eric July. I'm gonna read them real quick to you. And the first one says, "Black folks act like the most hardest motherfuckers, and then will act like they're scared of their life for being black." So basically what he's saying is, like, people will act super tough, super macho, and they'll take on the world, but then all of a sudden you talk about police brutality, and it's all, how do I got to talk to my kids about how they need to deal with the police so that they're not killed and all that stuff. And it's just kind of like we already know the numbers. The numbers are ridiculously low. Like it's less than like a 1 in a million chance that you'll be shot by police.
Mm-hmm.
So like you as like you have a better chance of becoming president in your lifetime than getting shot by the police. So like they don't like numbers because numbers destroy their entire argument. And then the next one says, for the last years, many folks have been bragging about how hard they hood is, but pearl clutch at the idea of racism.
And you know what's funny about that? My thinking with black people, especially the ones who buy into this liberal narrative, a lot of black people in 2017, if you're not over the age of 45 or 50 and you didn't live in the segregation era or in the era of like Jim Crow, I don't think if you were born in the 70s or 80s that you really can be that upset about racial injustice and inequality in this country, because I don't believe that in fact you have experienced to that level that maybe the generation in the past did. Like there wasn't the school that you weren't allowed to go to because you were black. There wasn't the restaurant that you couldn't go to because you were black. In fact, everybody now does everything they can to be inclusive. So my thing is with now in 2017, what people want to call racism is really being a prejudice, and you can never eliminate
Prejudice.
yeah, you can never eliminate prejudice from anybody. In fact, I would dare to argue that black people are probably more prejudiced than white people are at this
They
juncture.
are. But so speaking on that subject again, before we get too far away from it, I basically said, I was like, basically what people are talking about is like, okay, I was like, we're not talking, I was like, there's legitimate claims for people that actually experience these events. We'll give the people that are actually victims of these events their claim that's legitimate. I was like, but our concern, I was like, is with the fakes. The people with the over exaggerated claims of fear, when people fear the cops more than other blacks, when that's who's more likely to kill them. It's an irrational fear, yet people signal like the most pressing issue is the police and not their neighbor.
Hmm. Interesting.
Like if we know the numbers. Black people kill each other at a significantly higher rate than any other community. I think there are issues that can be handled and change that. I believe if we remove the victimless crimes like the whole drug war, and we stop having policing for those things, there would be less harassment in the community for what I would call a non-violent crime. Traffic stops for lights and people acting out because of how the media has them portraying police. If it would also protect our police more from those irrational people who do act out and decide that they're not going to go to jail because they're getting a parking ticket for having their taillights out. If we get rid of the victimless crimes so that police can pull someone over and say, hey, by the way, buddy, your lights are out, try to get those fixed. It'll be real dangerous with them. Or if you get caught driving at night, we might have to give you a ticket or something because you can't have your vehicle driving without lights. But you're free to go. We're not going to give you a ticket or anything. If they had more positive interactions instead of seeing what they see, because I tell people, like, there's trillions. You can't even really count. Like, I don't even know what number to even start with to determine the number of interactions people have with each other on a daily basis that are completely peaceful, completely without racism. And the media is such a small entity, and they can
Hmm.
only cover so few instances, and people seem to want to see things that offend them, see things that make them angry. So the media caters to that. They find the most upsetting instance that they can. So, you know, that worst thing that happened that day, the media finds and they run it, and everyone runs the story because everyone, like, it's all about money. It's all about getting that attention, getting those shares, getting those likes, getting people to click so you get the advertisers. They don't care what the story says. That's why you have headlines that are just blatant lies that aren't the truth. It's to get you to click on it, or get you to read on their website, or
On a
to
false
get you to
outrage.
just share it.
Yeah.
Yes, the false outrage. And I said, so it's like, when you have that type of mentality where people aren't even reading the news articles and they're believing titles, and you have satire sites that are literally fake news, and people are sharing fake news as though it's the real thing, like, you're creating this environment of hostility, you're creating this environment of divide. And I tell people, like, you have Facebook websites like Media Takeout, and almost every single one of their articles that they post, if you look at the title, 95, probably 99% of them have a race in the title.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even matter what it could be for. It would be like, you know, teenager wins a spelling bee with kids 10 years older than them at the age of 6. But it wouldn't just be a, like I said, teenager. But, you know, as a kid wins spelling bee, but it would be like black kid wins spelling bee, or, you know, or white police officer attacks black elderly woman, or, you know, just simple thing like, oh, black cop saves white man. And it's like, why can't it be a cop doing his job and saving another American citizen? Why are we literally trying to be offended? Why do people search for things to offend them, and then conflate that with something that isn't even there? And then they take these one-offs that happen around the country. They take these one-offs, and that's why I say, when you really trim down the numbers for the number of unarmed black men that are probably unjustly killed, I was like, when you take those numbers down to the real numbers, the ones that weren't fighting back, the ones that were, you know, actually no reason to be arrested, and it's just like bad judgment, or even if you did have racism involved, it's like, when you do that, I was like, you can't call it racism anymore.
Yep.
I was like, it's too small of a number to justify as racism. It's not a large enough pool. It becomes an event. It becomes something that happened where it was one bad person that was actually doing something bad. It wasn't, you know, systemic oppression where all the police were in on this, and this was planned. It was one bad person ruining it, and the media blowing it out of proportion and making it seem like it's all of them doing this.
And you know what's funny about that? And this is where I get all the anti-American sentiment from. When I see it on TV and people protesting the flag and coming up with reasons such as, you know, well, the flag was, you know, was made while slaves were still in slavery, and the anthem is racist. It's written by a guy who was a racist, who had a racist verse in it, and this country was founded by a guy who owned slaves. And my thing is, it's like, okay, if you want to get rid of everything Jefferson did, why don't we give back the Louisiana Purchase to France right now, since he was a slave owner? Let's get back. Let's get back all the territory west. Let's give it all back. Let's start there, and then we'll start with getting rid of these colleges. And anybody who has a degree from Virginia, it's now null and void because a racist founded that college. Now, and we can start there. And my thing is if people are going to go with this narrative, you know, and yes, America has a past. It has a past of slavery. It has a past of racism. But I think what white people are tired of, and I think this is what the majority of white people are, I I, for one, do not believe that the majority of white Americans are racist. I don't believe that there are really
You
that
know,
many white
I'm a,
supremacists in
I'm
this
a,
country. I don't believe it.
I'm gonna, I'm gonna give some anecdotals real quick because everyone always hates anecdotals, but us go with the flag real quick. I have multiple feelings on the flag based on my own political beliefs. Uh, one of my beliefs is we should just get rid of the flag completely, but that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of one of those I wouldn't care if it was gone. My other belief is we could do away with the flag and change it. Like I said, if we change the flag and we believe that America is a better place and that we should go forward and change how people view America. So then you can say, okay, this flag doesn't have the same blood on it that the old flag has. This is a new flag, a new beginning for America, where we're united, and let's go from there. Said, or the third option, you keep the flag. I was like, and you realize that you are an American. You don't. And I tell people, I was like, you can't be African American. I was like, Africa is a continent. It's not a country. I was like, it is a continent. It is not a country. You cannot be African American. I was
And
like, it
not,
would be. I was
yeah.
like, it would be like calling someone European American, but they don't call themselves European American. I mean, people call them Europeans because they don't know their heritage. But you have Germans and you have Spaniards and you have British people. I was like, you have all that. And when Africans come here, the real Africans come here. They're Somalian, they're Norwegian, or Nigerian, Sudanese. That's who they are. They don't come here and gain citizenship and then say I'm African American. That's why when you go to Africa and you say I'm African American, they just look at you like with disdain, like, no, like, how many generations of your family have to be born in America before you start claiming American? I was like, you don't see people running around like, I'm Italian all the time. And they're like, oh, they're like, I'm Italian, but then they'll just be like, but the majority of the time, I'm an American, I'm an American, I'm an American.
And
But
not only that,
black people don't want to just say I'm an American. They want to be something. They want to claim something that they have no claim to.
but you want to know what's funny even about that? As much as black people want to blame, the white people in 2017 for something that happened starting in the 1700s and 1600s and whatnot, the real people who they should be blaming are their ancestors who lived in Africa who actually sold us to the slave masters. It was our own people who sold us to people in ships so that they could bring us over here. And if you notice, there has never been an African country that has protested and said, send our ancestors back that you took from us. but yet black people have never brought that up. And my thing is, so you come to a country where at first people are treating you like not even a person, and then they move beyond that, and then 100 years later they move even further beyond that, and then racial relations are getting to the point of where now not only are you considered an equal, I believe that probably about 95% of all Americans, especially white Americans, will look at black people and say, yeah, they're equal with me. They don't believe in white supremacy. Like you keep hearing this narrative. Oh, this guy is a white supremacist, blah, 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 blah.
That whole narrative drives me crazy because I have to shut it down a lot of times because they'll, like, if you, I don't know, you're not big on the internet, I don't know. So there was a Vice interview with pretty much this backwoods white lady and her husband, and they're just talking about uh, being white in America and everything for the most part. And I guess the guy kind of mentions, he's like, "Oh, do you believe in genocide?" And she goes, "Oh, I think there should be another genocide." Or she's like, "I believe there should be a genocide, or or another one or something." And everyone kind of goes quiet, and he's like, "You're talking about like the kids and the women, the children, and everything." She's like, "Yeah." She's like, "I think they should all be killed." And he's kind of like, oh, and people are in there like, oh, she's a white supremacist. And I'm like, well, and and they're like, why would you want, other people to be killed? And she's like, because I want my white babies to have a chance. And everyone's like, oh, she's a white supremacist. She's a white supremacist. And I'm like, no, she's not a white supremacist. I was like, she's ignorant. I was like, that's a fact. They're like, why isn't she a white supremacist? So I was like, well, for one, I was like, if you're a supremacist, I was like, she must be the most self-hating supremacist where she has to kill her opposition in order for her kids to succeed. That means everyone's above you. I was like, if your opposition is so good that you have to kill them to get them out of the way for you to succeed, I was like, you ain't supreme to nothing. You're below them. I was like, so that to me reads as insecurity. I was like, that's not supremacy. I was like, secondly, I was like, we know she's ignorant. I mean, her teeth are falling out, for crying out loud. I was like, she's ignorant. I was like, so because of her ignorance, she doesn't understand. I was like, she knows what she's saying. She knows genocide means kill. I was like, but she doesn't have the intelligence to lead any sort of movement like that. She doesn't have a following of people who believe, that have that same sentiment as her. I was like, so to say she's a supremacist by herself, I was like, she doesn't have the makings of it. She doesn't have the leadership capabilities. I was like, she doesn't have the mentality of being above anyone. I was like, she doesn't believe she's superior, because if she believes she's superior, she wouldn't need to kill her opposition. She'd just be like, oh, well, we're better than them. We'll just beat them at it because it's just naturally better, easier for us to do it.
And you know what? The whole narrative of white supremacy in places of power, my thing is you don't see that anywhere close to where you would have seen it after the Civil War or during Reconstruction or during the 1940s or 50s or with Jim Crow. If you see a person who is a white supremacist, and what I mean by that, a white supremacist, ultimately believes that only white people can do something, and they're the best at everything, and they ultimately must be the ruling class.
They are part of the ruling class already, so it's kind of like
that is correct.
They've been in that position already, and they're still in that position.
That is correct. That is correct. And that is why they would have to, if they're in the ruling class, they would specifically have to put laws on the book to make sure that black people never, in fact, become a part of that ruling class, right?
Exactly.
So why then in America have we seen black people begin to infiltrate the highest sectors of government?
What people say is that, you got to let some of them up, because if you don't, then you have dissent and you'll have a revolution at some point. So,
but if you're a white supremacist, that logically doesn't make sense.
That doesn't bother you. That
logically doesn't make sense, because if you're a white supremacist, you already know
you don't want anyone to be even associated.
Yeah,
and I believe in a free market. I believe in a free country. And people are like, oh, would you rather live? Would you rather have segregation or live next to a white supremacist? And it was just a funny question. I said, I'd rather live next to a white supremacist. And they're like, why? I said, well, let's see. If we go by how society is right now, property values are tied together. So if I'm sitting right next to him in the house next to him, I was like, he has to acknowledge that I'm his equal because I'm able to live in the same community as him.
See,
I was like, first of all, I was like, no one's superior to me, first of all. So I was like, he would have to acknowledge it because I'm in his community, or we're in the same community. So if he wants to ever be superior to me, he's gonna have to buy a bigger house somewhere where I can't move. I was like, but if I'm in your community, you're not gonna be superior to me. I was like, at least that would, I could wake up every single day and enjoy that one, because I gotta look at, like, sip my tea and just imagine the anguish on his face every morning.
See, and black people don't think of it like that. Black people don't think of it in terms of,
like, I wouldn't want want to be around someone like that. Oh my God. Oh,
And my thing is, what are they going to do to you? Like, what can they really do to affect your life on an everyday basis? What can they do to stop you from making money? What can they do from stop you from getting educated? What can they really do?
So I've wanted to make a video on this. I haven't done it yet because I've moved into a house recently, as you know, and it's beautiful. We have an acre and a half out here. It's very nice and peaceful. And a lot of Black people will say things like, I've noticed the Black people that complain about racism the most are the ones that don't live in white communities.
That's 1,000%. That's 1,000% true. And I have a point to bring up after that.
I always say, I'm like, as a Black person that lives in West Virginia, West Virginia is full of rednecks and KKK people all around you. And there's the Black population here is like 4 or 5%. I'm thinking it's like 6% now, because I'll tell you, like, in the last like 5 months, I've seen more Black people in this town than I've seen in like the last 2 years. So the percentage has gone up. But I tell people, I say, if white people are so racist, you would think that me, who's lived in white communities all over this country, from West Virginia to North Dakota to Colorado, I was like, because I'm middle class for the most part. I'm like, so I don't live at the poverty level, so I don't have to live in those communities. I was like, you would think that I would be the one to have more experiences with racism than the people that live in Black community or the poor communities. And like they say, crime happens in vicinity to you. So when you think about all the issues that happen in the Black community, and I wonder, you get so many Black people that are afraid to leave the Black community. I'm like, so you'd rather be in a community that has more crime, more police, and more problems, because you want to be around Black people, because for whatever reason they've convinced you. I was like, you spend the least amount of time around white people, but they've convinced you that if you go out into a white neighborhood, that you're just going to be followed, chased down, the police are going to be stopping at your house every day. I was like, it doesn't happen like that. I've been in West Virginia for 2 years now, and I haven't been pulled over one time by a cop. I haven't been stopped in town walking around once by a cop. I haven't even met a local cop, other than when my white neighbors that were in my old townhouse complex were acting a damn fool drunk and had the police called on them. That was the most interaction I've had with a cop, was breaking up fights of white people in my communities that I've lived in. So the whole getting harassed thing doesn't happen. And when I'm out here and I look at what I have, and I say to myself, why are Black people afraid of this? I'm like, you see them packed in these urban environments, stacked on top of apartment complexes and townhouses, and just packed together like sardines. And I said, the only thing that's ever come out of groups that are packed that tight.
Yep.
I was like, the only thing that comes out of groups that packed together with that many people and that many different personalities is violence. I was like, why people in the suburbs don't get in fights with each other for a lot often?
Because they're concerned about their own family. They're concerned about their own stuff that they got going on, and they're not all up in each other's way, all up in each other's business, all up constantly around each other.
I can go on my porch and sit on my porch, and I can look over at my neighbor's house, and her house is about 150 feet away from me, or something like that. More like 300 feet away from me. I got my neighbor across the street. He's about 300 feet away from me. The house that's on my right side, I can't even see their front porch from my front porch. I mean, it's close enough to where I can walk to. It's like 300 feet, but it's blocked by other stuff, trees and everything, and all that. I don't see my neighbors except for the one across the street from me. He's cool. We talk and everything. He's an older guy. He's one of the guys that would have lived through, you know, segregation and all that. He's that old. I mean, he's let me use his lawnmower to cut my grass, and we sit there and we talk about, you know, things going on in society and all that. And he's just a real nice guy and no problems at all. I don't have to be sitting on my porch and, you know, Tyrone's on his porch gritting on me. And I look at him wrong, and now he wants to fight. And we arguing back and forth. Only we arguing back and forth 7 feet away from each other. And I was like, and that's what happened. And like I said, when I was in my townhouse community, white people did that. You had the one girl whose mom was next door neighbors to the older couple next to us, and she was living with her boyfriend over in another townhouse, and she's like 20-something years old, getting drunk and getting mad at her mom's friend who's like 80 years old, talking about, oh, I'll beat you up, and she's talking about, I'm get my husband to get his gun and he's going to shoot you, and she's slashing his tires, and then you got the couple down at the other end, and she's like, your husband's cheating on you when you're out of town, and blah blah blah. I'm just like, these people are crazy.
And
and this was a cheaper community to live in.
And this is what they do.
It looks nice, and people always think, oh, you know, white people are so good. I'm like, no. I was like, they're just as crazy. I'm like, you would think, I was like, that me being the black person, that I would be the one that should be having the problems, because we had 2 interracial couples in the complex, and everyone kept saying, oh, you know, the owners don't like black people, but, you know, 2 interracial couples living there, and we had a black girl, she lived there, but the black people didn't have any of the problems.
Now I have a question for you.
That community, like I said, those people were 10 feet away from each other. It wasn't a trailer park community. It was still up, you know, like lower middle class community.
And I think they passed a law recently where when they make projects, they can no longer make them where they're stacked on top of each other. I believe that they made that law a couple years ago because they said it breeds violence, like you said. But my question is this: with this narrative going out, because you've just talked about how you've seen this narrative disproved in person. My thoughts on this are this: in every white community predominantly that you see, especially the ones that are in the suburbs and whatnot, what you see there is a good example of legislation and legislative leaders that are elected based on what they give. And what they have in these communities are always one of two things. They either have safety or quality education. The schools are better. Why is it that people move out of inner cities to go to better schools? Because their schools are better where? In the suburbs. Why is that? It's because they vote for and they make accountable the legislators who make laws and who are accountable for the budget to prioritize education and safety. Whereas in the inner city neighborhoods, there is no accountability to the leadership who we put in charge. So with that in mind, my question to you is why is it then that you see in the predominant suburb communities where they have better schools, why do you think black people who live in the inner cities haven't taken a cue from that and said, hey, why is it that their schools are better? Because I mean, I can mention a couple of different reasons why, such as, you know, most of them probably have jobs where they're taxpayers and the taxpayers' money go toward funding better schools. That's one reason. Number two, as I mentioned, the people who they vote for, usually if they're conservative, that means that they're also conservative, not just morally, but also fiscally. So they prioritize things differently. They don't prioritize programs. They prioritize education over the programs because people who are educated don't need to depend on a program to get them stuff. And also, three, they prioritize the safety of their people. And so you don't really hear about the same incidents in these suburban areas with cops and all that as you do in the inner cities, which to me is quite funny. Isn't that interesting that in the suburban areas, it seems like white cops are usually even more, you know, they're less likely to kill black men and less likely to do all these different things, even though from the narrative that they give in the media, cops are racist and all this and all that. Isn't that funny to you?
It is. I have another quick short story. In the middle, I was coming home from work in West Virginia. I was on the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia over sort of north of Wheeling on 22, and I lost my iPod. I left it in my truck at work, but I got out of my truck. It was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. Got out of my car, and I'm looking through my car. I'm literally parked in like this pitch black area right on the border. There's an old gas station there, but it's just pitch black, and I'm digging through my car trying to find this thing. And I step back out of my car, and there's a cop standing right over my shoulder, like right there. I was like, "Oh!" He like caught me off guard. I'm just sitting there, and at the same time, I got the liberal narrative running through my mind. Oh my God, white cop! You know, I'm in West Virginia, and I'm like, but I was like, we always say, you know, just do the right thing, and normally you shouldn't have any issue. I was like, hey, hello, officer. He's like, everything good? I was like, yeah, I'm looking for my iPod. I was like, if I lose that, my wife is going to kill me because she would have killed me if I had lost it. And I said, but I think I left it at work. He said, all right, have a nice night. Walked back to his vehicle, got in, pulled away. I got back in my car and went back to work and got my iPod. And I said, you know, I was like, you would think that's what I ended up writing a article about it a little bit later, but I said, you know, that could have been a very awkward situation if I would have been a typical liberal or black person and started like instantly just took offense to a cop showing up right there. Like, for all I knew, he was parked there trying to catch speeders, and I pulled into his spot, and he's like, hey, I'm just going to talk to this guy. I wonder why the hell he's stopping his car. Or, you know, maybe he did steal the car and it's not working anymore, but, you know, he could tell I was looking for something. And, you know, he didn't conflate anything. I didn't conflate anything. And we went our separate ways without any incident at all. And I said, you know, that's something that comes from the community you live in. I said, you would think that if he was a racist cop, he would be, you know, more authoritarian towards me in that position for no reason. But I say a lot of it could come down to the interactions they have. If black people aren't leaving the black community, and cops have very few interactions with black people, and every single one of those interactions is positive because the ones that leave the community are more well off, more educated and respectful of people, they don't have those same problems. So they don't have a jaded view. Whereas a cop that lives in the city or works in the city every single day, he has to deal with, you know, someone being shot, someone being robbed, you know, someone wanting to fight the police that day just in a bad mood. Like, he deals with this on a daily basis. So, you know, the stress of being on edge comes with the territory and the stress of not having to deal with any issues.
I'm about to say, you must have moved because you have a bad connection now.
In a small town, and
sure enough, we were losing you. I think you're moving through your house. Are you moving through your house? I have a bad signal. But that's okay. I'll try to get him back. But what he's saying, and I agree with this 100%, is I do believe that there has been a media campaign to propagandize the black community so that we're conditioned to think a certain way and to react a certain way to law enforcement. And I think there was a narrative some years ago where, people believe that cops were only made to enforce or only made to oppress black people. And that's why uh, white racists went to the police force. And I think that narrative now is getting busted up, because now with blacks with the ability to be on the police force and to change things, and with black police chiefs in some of these cities, I think you're starting to see that change. But I do believe that as a nation and in this country, that we have been told time and time again, that there's this thing of systematic racism, systematic oppression. And I believe that this country has taken gigantic steps to try to rectify that. And I think that when black people, and when the black people who are in the media and the black liberals, when they don't acknowledge that this has been done, it kind of hurts the progress that we've made. Because then now, instead of unifying people and making it so that we're all just citizens and we're all just people, it divides us, so that now you create a new group of people who now look at black people as being entitled or whiny or complaining. And I want to be a person who guards against that, because I believe that if we take a general stand in terms of how we run our communities, such as prioritizing our education, making our legislators prioritize education and safety, in terms of getting it so that our men are back in the home and back with their children, and so that we can economically be able to teach our kids not to have kids before they get married, and to graduate from high school, and to get educated, and to not go to jail, and to do these things. I think that we can continue to progress much in the way that we were progressing before the great welfare state happened. And so therefore, with that being said, I would like to sign out on tonight, this episode of Revolution Radio. Be tuned for my next podcast. I want to thank my guest, Daryl Meadows, who was with me on tonight, even though we lost him with a bad connection late. But I want to thank him for being on, and I want to thank you for listening. Stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be about, which will be titled, Why I'm Glad Colin Kaepernick's Out of the League. Until next time, take care.